This is a session on diversity in schools and how we as educators both form and later impose some of our values on others within our organizations. This is aimed at educational leaders. And the last part of the presentation regards one aspect of diversity in our schools that oftentimes seems to be an area that is not garnering the attention that it might need, and that is the plight of boys in our schools. On this slide, if you would please take a second and look at the various aspects of diversity that are portrayed on this slide. Range from me being a middle-aged, white, male, well-educated. This type of thing is one form of diversity that you'll find in our schools that oftentimes most folks wouldn't even view that as a form of diversity. If you take a look at some of the other images that are on this particular slide, if we take a look over here, you can see a portrayal of Tupac Shakur, a rap artist, and what would be your mental image or paradigm of this person, or a Latino person. If you were to meet this person on the street, how would you react? How about somebody like this, who are little people? Do you have some mental image of their capacity or their ability to be a good neighbor or friend? What mental images jump into your mind when you see this portrayal of a Buddhist monk? Does that send you a message? How about the blonde below? We all have heard blonde jokes. In our schools is a whole new area for us that we have to be cognizant of, and that is the LGBT population. I was just looking to see what some of the statistics say, and some very probably accurate dynamic surveys have been done that estimate the population of this particular sexual orientation to be somewhere in the area between 3 and 4% of our population. In other words, some 9 million people. How about this athlete? Does that bring to mind any particular mental image? How about the young girl? How about the old person? Or does this person bring some other image to mind? How about somebody who's overweight? How about somebody who looks like this? Or this? Or even this? How about this stereotype? Or these women? The point of this portrayal is to have you begin to examine what some of those images bring to mind for you. How will we deal with this student in our classroom? Think of all the labels that we go through life with. I talked to you a little bit about mine, those being, a white middle class, middle-aged guy, maybe even moving towards being elderly. Oh boy, what an awful thought, in the sense of all of the limitations it brings to oneself as you apply that label to yourself. How many labels can you give to yourself? Woman, African American, mother, father, young, old, abled, disabled, Protestant, Catholic. The list goes on and on and on. Think of the labels that we have in school. There certainly are plenty of them. For me, again, I'm white, I'm male, I'm middle-aged, I'm educated, I'm upper middle class, I'm married, I'm a heterosexual, I'm a middle-of-the-road liberal, I'm a northerner. So what labels can you bring to yourself? Take a look at our list here, and all of these are used in school. Look at them all. Some kids are gifted, some are disabled, some have ADHD, a lot of them are boys. We have speech impaired students, we have ESL, which obviously in our area is a growing group that we have to deal with. We talk about students as free and reduced. How about age labels like first grader, subject matter labels, a gym teacher, a principal as a job label. This person's a reader, this person's a student, this person's troubled. We use such labels as emotionally disturbed or learning disabled. We discuss some folks in our organizations as support staff. So the question arises for us as educational leaders are, how are we going to provide guidance and act as a role model in dealing with the issue of diversity in our organization? And I took what I could see as maybe some examples that I thought we might want to model ourselves after. If you think about Gandhi and his role in the Indian Revolution and his commitment to nonviolence, and secondly, Nelson Mandela and his self-sacrifice, being in prison for close to 30 years. Abraham Lincoln, who guided our nation through probably one of the most difficult periods of our history. If you don't recognize this young woman, she just won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Malala, who basically stood up for education for women in the Middle East. We have Mother Teresa and her self-sacrifice for her entire life, and Winston Churchill, who led England through the terrible period of World War II, when England was on the verge of being annihilated by the Nazis. What can we take from each of these people to put in our educational leadership tool chest? I kept thinking more about who might be some other people we might want to think about, and some other areas to think about and reflect upon as in terms of their personal attributes that they brought to leadership are pictured here. Martin Luther King, Pope Francis, who has been questioning the doctrine of the Catholic Church, an institution that has incredible institutional inertia. A couple of my heroes, Robert Kennedy and Cesar Chavez, who worked hard for those who had no voice. George Washington and the sacrifice that he went through in the early days of our nation. Harriet Tubman, who took on the personal role of leading slaves north in very dangerous conditions. The Wright brothers, who said, "Yup, we can do it, we can fly." Rosa Parks, who refused to sit at the back of the bus with the possibility that she could be harmed. Franklin Roosevelt, who led this country through the Great Depression and also World War II, about the individual courage of the nameless thousands and millions who have served in our military. And then I think about intellectual giants like Leonardo da Vinci. My point to you is look at the diversity that you see in front of you with all of these different leaders. What was it that made them successful? What do they have in common? Think about what you have in common with them. Think about what they had to do in dealing with the issue of diversity. By that meaning all of the different people who were their followers and the different agendas that they were working towards. Think about the following question. As an educational leader, do you have the following in your repertoire or skill set? I think that the folks that you just were reviewing in some form or fashion showed probably a lot of these traits, probably most of them at one point or another. Do you have the ability to be courageous when in the face of adversity? Can you persevere? Do you have resilience when your ideas get shut down or you have a lot of resistance to some change that would be good for the students in your school or system? Do you have the self-esteem to take on the slings and arrows of those who will question everything that you do as a leader? Are you intellectually curious? Do you have imagination? Do you have the physical stamina to put up with the stress and the energy that is needed to make the types of changes that will make the system better for all the different types of students that will be in them? And do you have the self-discipline to get back into the arena day after day after day? Can you make it okay to be different? Or does it have to be the same old way? To not give up on any kid, that's really what diversity is all about in terms of our work in schools as educational leaders. How can we put together structures that focus completely on this aspect of what we do? We need to find new and exciting ways for every kid to learn. Certainly, the variety of those that are in front of us are as varied as they are. So what can we do as leaders to set the plate for all of those students to be successful? And that being no matter if they're smart or lovable, they're able or they speak English, even when they're not attractive or maybe not even clean. Sometimes they're sick. We have a prejudice towards our students who come from a good home because generally they have the skills to make them successful in school. We have a tendency to think about our students as heterosexual or Christian. How can we make sure that we are all inclusive for those that may not fit those particular constructs? That, in essence, folks, is Diversity 101 for the school leader. As you can see, I tried to capture really the diversity that we have in front of us as educators. Take a look at our first slide here, and what we have is our young folks who may be elementary aged, whose needs are much different than the next group. This is a diverse group, could represent our high school students or our middle schoolers and all of the developmental needs they bring to bear. Lastly, over on the far right, we have our very little ones, and how are we going to deal with all the different issues that they bring to bear. Oftentimes that is very pronounced in those classrooms, as some have been exposed to many different things and others not so much, and as a result have gaps in their learning. I'd like to discuss one aspect of diversity that is of great interest to me, and that is one that is a function of gender or the education of boys. And I tried to capture really what I think is the essence of this aspect of our educational institution and its disconnect with this half of our population. And that is that boys are kind of dirty. They like to do things outside. They oftentimes rebel or don't react well to authority. They're rambunctious and need to play and need as in social neuroscience tells us, rough and tumble play. But on the other hand, we have a tendency to think that they don't need the same level of support or love as uh, as girls, and nothing could be farther from the truth. Just some facts about boys that I find interesting and really portray the difference between various uh, genders, between the male and the female. Preschool boys are 4.5 times more likely to be expelled from a preschool than girls. And it's interesting to see that figure and wonder why that is. I think one of the things we need to consider is that whole idea of rough and tumble play and its disconnect with the academic versus more child-initiated versions of both preschools and elementary schools. By that, we mean in the academic realm of preschool, they're being drilled and killed to get ready for kindergarten versus the child-initiated preschool, which would be more play-oriented, and the learning would be a function of play within the classrooms. And here's some figures that discuss the outcomes of academic versus child-initiated preschools. And what we find is academic preschoolers who've attended a very rigid preschool are held back less by 3rd grade. However, after that point in time, there's no difference between academic and child initiated in terms of the student achievement. What you find is as those students went to 4th grade, academic preschool attenders are doing worse, and part of that is because they're behaving worse. Boys who attended child-initiated preschools were keeping up with the girls once we got into the upper grades. So we can see that the importance developmentally for boys of the type of child-initiated, play-centered, and developmentally appropriate preschools is important. So I guess the bottom line is what it's saying is, let's let the boys be boys and not try to pigeonhole them into academics too soon. What that looks like is lots of academic active play. You have to make leeway for them for rough and tumble and physical contact. There's a lot of sensory development that boys find especially useful, and even what you'll find is many girls react very well to mud and silly putty, the water table. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that boys engage in aggressive play. And in cognitive neuroscience, there was a lot of discussion about how important this is to the boys' development in terms of being able to become socialized, and it establishes the so-called pecking order as they engage in this type of play. One of the things that has been a reaction really to, I think, the world of the academic orientation of both preschool and elementary school is this idea of redshirting. That is to keep our boys out of school for a year in order to allow them to enter the public school system or the private school system as a more mature young person. And one of the things that is a bit disconcerting about redshirting is the idea that it really is engaged in by people who have the money to be able to keep their children out of public school for a year longer than others who might not have the same economic resources. One of the things that is a central component to, I think, addressing the gender issue for boys in school is something as simple as recess. Something as simple as an area every day where students can get some exercise. And I think not only for boys is this a good thing, but it's also shown to be good for all students. And here's some statistics around, recess as it stands in our schools today. And of course, we can say that much of this has been a function of the emphasis on standards and standardized testing. And as you can see, as students progress up the academic ladders through the grades, that the amount of resource that is available to them gets less and less. So the question is recess a productive use of school time? And all of the evidence shows that recess, if it is well supervised and is not an area for chaos and bullying, can be very productive in terms of allowing students the break that they need, the physical outlet, and it's important for oxygenating the brain, and it's a good developmental piece for all children. Another area where boys are very different in terms of school is in the area of literacy. For instance, the National Literacy Council shows that only 1 in 4 boys reads outside of class every day. This is disconcerting as this contributes to the gap between the genders. If we take a look at the PISA international comparisons and Pearl's international comparison, what we see is across all OECD countries, which is basically the Western developed countries, girls do better in reading than boys. And I think that we can certainly look at cognitive neuroscience and what we know about brain development to help explain that difference. The Boys Reading Commission has found that boys' underachievement in reading is associated with 3 different factors. The first is the idea that the home and family environment is prejudiced towards girls in terms of literacy. Girls are more likely to be bought books, taken to the library, and reading is seen as an acceptable activity. The school environment is often a place where there is a disconnect between boys and reading as well. Teachers have a limited knowledge of contemporary and attractive text for boys, and one of the problems is that the actual nature of the literature is such that it turns boys off. The other thing is that boys need to have role models. That is, they have to know that reading and literacy is not a girly thing, and that it's okay for boys to be readers and writers. One of the things that we have a tendency to think is that this gender gap is new. It is not. It really has just begun to gain focus. In the 70s and the 80s, what we had was the emphasis on math and science and girls' achievement gap. Some of those concerns have been taken into account, and I think we're beginning to understand that gap more and to make sure that we're giving girls the opportunities to explore math and science. So part of it has been that this gap has existed, but really what has happened is that there is more focus on it. And that probably is a good thing, because what that will do is allow us to put into place, as educators, various structures that can help literacy and boys. If we take a look at another quote from the Boys Reading Commission, one of the things that we need to see is that there is a difference between the way boys learn to read and girls. We have to be able to be patient, allow for the developmental milestones in the brain to develop for boys, which is occurring at a lesser or slower rate than their peer age group in girls. So a couple things that happen, and none of this will come as a surprise to you as teachers or educational leaders, is that some of the recommendations that they make seem to be ones that we know work for all kids. One of the things they do discuss is making sure that we use all the different modes. And I think that, in my opinion, this is the one we need to be really concentrating on in terms of the classroom. How do we integrate kinesthetic learning into the classrooms? A couple things more about the brain and the difference between boys and girls are in this slide. What we know is that the brain is different for girls and boys, and that we have to recognize that that certainly the prefrontal cortex, where executive function and abstract reasoning, which is certainly describes reading, is more active and develops at an earlier age in girls than boys. One of the things that research has shown is that boys have more neural rest states during the day than girls do. So when it looks like that boys may not be paying attention, that may be true because their brain has shifted into this neural rest state. So it's important that teachers understand brain development so that they can anticipate and build into their lessons various hooks that can bring boys back out of these rest states. One of the things that you see is that early on, girls have more crosstalk between the hemispheres of their brains than boys do. And there are differences in the way that language is processed. Here's a list of the functions of the prefrontal area of the brain, which we know develop at different rates for boys than girls. So what are the implications for us as educators and educational leaders? I would like you to take a few minutes and click on the TED Talk below. I'm pointing at it right now. That will take you to a TED discussion on re-engaging boys in learning. When you're done with that, come back to the PowerPoint. One of the things that we know about boys is that they are at risk from the beginning, and we have to take that into account in terms of their learning and in terms of understanding what's going on in our classrooms and why sometimes there's such a disconnect between boys and school. With that, I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. As potential educational leaders, what is it that you can do to alter the structures of school to recognize the differences between the genders and the way that they learn? How can we attract more men into education, keeping in mind that only 1 out of every 4 teachers that is, are male? We need to provide more incentives for men to become teachers, although the evidence will show that most likely students really don't care about the gender of their teacher as much as they care about whether the teacher has built a strong and respectful relationship with them.